Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody who's showed up. So we're gonna set you guys up with your first experience developing for Android. And if you've already been doing a little bit of Android development, this may be a little low level for you, but stick around and see what you may or may not learn, and give us some feedback on how it goes, because we want to continue this online workshop into other more advanced topics as time goes on. So what are we going to do? We're going to, in the next, actually we have around 90 minutes, so we're going to learn a bit about just the Android platform and what that means, what Android is all about without the code, or at a higher level, and then we're going to learn a bit about the tools that you use to actually build applications, and then we're actually going to see some applications built. And you can take that sample code that we'll have available on the website for this online workshop, and use that to sort of practice and play around afterwards. So if you miss anything as we're going through, don't worry. This workshop will be available afterwards, and you'll be able to use that code and play around with it. So a little bit about us. Again, like Beth already said, my name's Tony Hillerson. I work on Android and iPhone applications and other mobile applications for a company called BrightKite, which is a location-based social network. I really like Android because I'm interested in playing around with little gadgets and phones and devices. I mean, who isn't? And I like the Android platform because it also is an open source platform. I'm really interested in open source. I'm really interested in seeing open source take off, and using Java, which is a language that I already know to build stuff for, with this open source framework for gadgets is pretty sweet, which is one of the reasons that I like Android so much. And thanks again to O'Reilly for hosting this, and thanks to Beth and everybody who's running this online workshop. Now, a little bit about you guys. Who can you just put into the chat window where you're from, where you're viewing this this workshop from? It'll give us kind of an idea of how far we're reaching. Cool. So we're hitting a lot of different places all over. Okay, good. Some other countries. India. I think that's the farthest that we've seen so far. That's good. Good to hear. Okay, so let's dive in and start talking about Android. So what Android is all about is sort of evidenced by the organization that puts Android out, makes Android available to us and to the device developers, is the Open Handset Alliance, which most people associate Android with Google, and that's true. They sort of kicked everything off, but they also put together this Open Handset Alliance, which is all about getting things like Android, or Android specifically, to device manufacturers and chip makers and the software companies that build things for Android devices, or for mobile devices in general. Why not make it easy for them to have one easy choice instead of building their own operating system or their own software that you need to run your mobile phone? They have this easy choice. It's open. You can tell what's going on. It's inside the code what the sort of software is being used to run the device, and it's available to everybody. It's an easy choice to make for someone who's putting out a new mobile phone. And then the user experience becomes more common as well, and people start to understand that they can change from one Android phone to another one, and the experience is going to be pretty much the same, and that's a pretty powerful thing. And so that's kind of the vision of the Open Handset Alliance, and Android is the realization of that vision. And the point of it all is ubiquity. Like I said, that user experience is going to be available on all sorts of Android devices, hopefully soon. Right now, at least in the U.S., we kind of have two phones to choose from, the HTC G1 and the HTC MyTouch, I believe this is called. The Google Ion is what it was called when they gave it away free at the Google I/O conference, which was pretty nice. But there's going to be more released, more and more as time goes on. The HTC Hero is going to be coming out soon. And I hear rumors all the time of different devices showing up around the world. It's kind of hard to keep up with all the rumors, but there's just going to be more and more devices realized pretty soon. Can I get an idea of who already has an Android device just by raising your hand inside the WebEx interface? Cool, looks like a few of you. That's good. Well, you'll be interested to know how easy it is once you get this software, to build Android applications and deploy them right to your device. That experience is pretty easy. So I touched on this a little bit, but it's an open source framework, the Android framework. You can go get it right now, and you can go look at, if you're interested in seeing how, for instance, Google built the camera application and how they did the things that the camera application allows you to do. You can go look at that code. You can get the SDK at developer.android.com. You can get the source at source.android.com. And if you're already a Java developer, chances are you're pretty used to using something like Eclipse. And there's a development environment that we're going to be using today inside of Eclipse that makes Android development really easy, from writing code all the way to deploying the stuff on your either device or your emulator. The platform, let's talk about the platform a little bit. It's built on Linux, so Android is sort of a built on a Linux operating system, which is a specific type of build which will be optimized for the device that it's on. And then on top of Linux, there's a bunch of native libraries, like things that are specific to the device, code that's specific to working the surface or the hard keyboard or the soft keyboard, depending on what that device is like, what kind of graphic capabilities the device has. Those are all taken care of by the native libraries, and that's down in the innards where you as a developer don't need to worry about that. And there's also a few pieces of software that are shipped along with Android, and that's taken care of down here, like SQLite and the WebKit browser. And those are all going to be available, and again, specific to the device to the needs of the device that it's on. Then on top of the native libraries, there is the Java runtime. And if you're familiar with Java, you know that the Java VM is sort of the whole idea of Java is write once, run anywhere, and that's made real by the Java VM, the virtual machine, because when you write Java code, it's not compiled down into machine-specific code. It's compiled down into what's called Java bytecode, which is interpreted by the Java virtual machine at runtime. So there's this layer of indirection that keeps any weird differences in the devices that you're running on separate from what you have to know in your code to make your code work. But the Dalvik VM, which was written by a Google employee, Dalvik is actually his ancestral home in, I believe, Iceland. What that is it's a Java virtual machine that's optimized for small devices with lower power footprint than, say, your desktop computer. There's needs there to make things a lot more efficient for a smaller, less capable device like your mobile phone. So that's what the Dalvik VM is. So when you compile, what actually happens is your Java code will be compiled again into, I believe it's a bytecode interpret. I may be wrong. I could look into that later and answer questions on the forum if you're interested in that. But I think there's a second compilation phase where that bytecode is turned into the Dalvik bytecode, which is much more efficient and ready to run on devices and use up less memory and processing power, which is good. But all of this is really low level, and you don't need to worry about these implementation details. What you're going to be dealing with mostly as an Android developer is the Android framework, which is provided for you inside the SDK, and is a lot of Java classes that deal with things like getting you the location, or dealing with the WebKit browser, or dealing with the contact database. Those are things that are provided for you by the framework. And on top of that framework are all the system applications that ship along with an Android device, like your contacts browser and the phone dialer and things like that. But right alongside those are your applications. So what's cool about your applications in the Android platform is that they sit They're not special. The applications that Google ships with the device are not special in the sense that they can't do things that your application can't. Your applications can do anything that those applications can, and in fact, the user can make choices about what applications they use, and they can choose, like, instead of, when they want to email something, instead of using the system application to email, they can choose to use your email application because they may like that experience better. And Android makes that possible. And so I think your application is sort of able to be a good citizen and offer functionality to other applications to use, and also get in and be able to replace the stock applications. And that's a pretty powerful feature of the Android framework that, say, the iPhone doesn't allow you to do. And I like that part of Android as well. So now, as we're going to start to get closer to the code here, there's a few vocabulary things that I want to mention to you that we're going to be talking about that you want to know what I mean. So the first one here is a resource. It's kind of a general term, but when we talk about it here, a resource is any sort of, like, strings or pictures or video maybe, or icons that you want to have inside your application that aren't actually code, but you want to deal with them in code. You want to pull them in code, or you want to refer to them, put them out onto the screen or something like that. All those things are packaged up and bundled along with the application, but you don't have to go load them off the file system. They're available through this class called R for resource, and we'll see how that works in a little bit. But when we talk about those are like the non-Java things that you want to have available in your application. Another term that you're going to hear pretty soon is called activity. An activity is basically a screen. So think about it. If your phone dialer is up, that's running one activity. If you change from the phone dialer over to email, then you're now running a different activity. You can pretty much think of an activity as one-to-one correspondence between a screen and an activity. So when you see something on the screen, there's one sort of activity running all the things that happen there. And things can change on the screen without changing activities. You can configure things to be visible or hidden, and show make different things happen on the screen without changing activities. But an activity will control all the things that happen sort of in that one context. And then when you want to move between activities, you're going to use something called an intent. So think of these activities as sort of stopping points on the user's journey through their Android device, and the intents are the sort of commands to move between those points. So when you want to do something like call a number, or like add a contact to the contact database, or email somebody, you say to Android as a developer that you want to accomplish this action, and you use an intent to tell Android to do that. So when you're moving between applications, it's probably an intent that's causing that to happen. So keep those in mind, and we're going to see you're going to see these show up pretty soon in code. But those are some things that we're going to be running into pretty soon. So now we're going to talk about building your first application. But before we do, I see one question at least, and maybe Beth caught some that I didn't. But there's a question from Jamie Lopez, or Jaime Lopez. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Sorry if I didn't. What's the difference between Java Mobile and the Dalvik VM? I'm not really sure of the difference at a VM level. I just know that the Dalvik VM is really well suited to small device footprints. But I can tell you that Java Mobile, developing for Java Mobile and developing for Android are worlds apart in terms of how easy it is and how nice it is as a developer experience. So I much prefer developing for Android. There's really not a lot that there's a few things that you're limited to with Android development, but there's a lot of things that you're limited to with Java Mobile development. I like Android is definitely an evolutionary step forward for developing for devices with Java. Beth, did I miss any other questions? Okay, it doesn't sound like I did. So let's start talking about the code. Let's get into what we're going to be learning here. We're going to learn our way around Eclipse a little bit. If you already know your way around Eclipse, then you're going to be pretty well off, and if not, I'm going to show you a few different pieces of the application that you'll run into a lot, and you'll see also some cool key combinations which will make your Eclipse development or your Java development a lot more efficient. And then we're going to see what specifically about Eclipse you do to build Android applications, and then we're going to build two simple views and make an intent to make your application switch between those two views, and then we'll, at different points, we'll be deploying to the Android emulator to actually see our code running. And if you want to follow along, feel free. But if you ever get stuck or you're not sure what's going on, just sit back and relax and watch what's going on, because you're going to be able to review this in the future when the sorry about that phone in the background. You're going to be able to review all this in the video that will be available to you after the screencast is done. So sorry about that. Let's dive right in and look at some code. So what I'm going to do first is pull up the Eclipse environment here after I share my desktop, and then make sure that everybody can see what I'm seeing. Does anybody have any trouble seeing this, the Eclipse IDE? Okay, good. Looking good. The first thing we're going to do is create a project. So let me point you out to a few different pieces of the Eclipse IDE. I have this sort of flying out from the side here, the Package Explorer. That is where you look at the different code and resources and things that are available to you. But I have this kind of hidden off to the side so that I can get more screen real estate, but you can choose to configure your interface however you'd like. The Package Explorer is up here to the left in my setup. So when you see me move over here and open this, that's called the Package Explorer. Down here at the bottom, there are a few different tabs that I have open. The Problems tab will show when there's different errors that Java has found, and the console is sort of giving us some messages about what's happening when we deploy to, say, the emulator or things like that. Up here in the top right, this button, I can choose to open the DDMS perspective. This is called a perspective, which is sort of like a configuration of your IDE. The DDMS perspective ships along with the Android plugin, and that lets you see things like which devices you have open here in the Devices tab in the top left, and then you can look at the memory profile of different things and do some profiling here, and also look at the files on your device, and you can control the emulator from there. There's also, we may run into this logcat tab right here that I maximized just now, and that will show us a log of whatever's happening on the device. So let's switch back here to the Java perspective. Give me some more room here, and now we're going to create our first Android project. So as I open the Package Explorer, I can right-click here and then say New Android Project, and that is where you will create an Android project when you go ahead and do that. So we're going to give this a name. We're going to call it Simple Flashlight, and we're going to be building something that's sort of like you may have seen in either the iPhone App Store or the Android Marketplace, just a nice colored screen that you could use as a flashlight if you wanted. But we're going to build two different colors that you can switch between. And we're actually going to look at an example of that running on the emulator in just a second. But what you need to do first is tell Android what you want, what version you want to work with. So this is kind of confusing, and let me go through this here. The build target tells Android what platform you're targeting. Android, if you're familiar with Android or you had an Android phone, you may have noticed that there was one minor upgrade and then one major upgrade since the release, and the 1.1 was the minor upgrade. The 1.5 is what everybody should be running now, and that was codenamed Cupcake. Most people refer to it as Cupcake. You can see that the platform version is 1.5, and the API version is 3. It's called number 3, and you'll see where that's referred to later. But I don't really see, unless you have a really specific need, there's no real reason for you to target Android 1.1. So you'll probably make the choice of developing for Android 1.5 here. But then there's this other option down here, which is a little bit confusing. What the Google APIs is just, it's Android 1.5. You're targeting Android 1.5, but you also want to use something along the lines of maybe the maps, or maybe if Google Voice is integrated later, that's going to be available here. If you want to develop for those things or use those types of components, you'll need to choose Google APIs. For our purposes, Google APIs is a good enough choice. It's like everything in the kitchen sink. You might as well just take that one, and that's not going to really hurt your app size or anything like that. So it's a fine choice. And again, that is the same as choosing Android 1.5 plus a few extra features. Okay, now for the application name, we're going to call it Simple Flashlight. Now the package name, if you're familiar with Java development, package is a way to sort of namespace your code so that it's specific to your application. And if you had like a class called person, that's a common domain element. So some other people might have something like that in their library that you may be using. Some other developers may have a person object, but you can prefix your person object with your package name, and that makes it a unique name when put totally together into like com.yourcompany.person. So I'm going to call this package com.o'reilly.simpleflashlight to give it a good unique name, because beyond just the basic benefits that Java already realized and gave you this option of running things against this package name is also the unique identifier for your application. So this distinguishes your application from other applications, and other applications that other developers may write and other applications that you may write. So make sure that you use not only your company name, but maybe the application name as part of the package name. Okay, we're also going to create one activity along with the project, and we'll call that Red Flashlight Activity. And again, the Min SDK version is 3. That was already
question.
Okay.
We have a question about versioning, and if we choose 1.1 or 1.5 or Google API, does it guarantee to generate forward-proof code?
Yeah, reading the question, I can see. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, no, it's not guaranteed to forward-proof your code. It should run on that version, but again, there's not going to be a lot of people that stay behind on the old version, and that's kind of an annoyance. It depends really on more like the APIs that you use, and you can see, I can see that you already kind of understand that with you were using the unofficial API type stuff. For Brightkite, I wrote a camera activity that used a lot of the specific camera features that I saw being used because we needed full control over that. But then when Cupcake came out, I was doing things that were deprecated and just crashed on Cupcake. So you need to be aware of less what version you're targeting for, and more what APIs you're using. I think that's the more important thing. Were there any other questions that you saw, Beth?
The only other one was the version of Eclipse that we should be using, and I know you had recommended Ganymede or greater, and so I'm assuming Ganymede, Galileo, either one of those would work. Okay.
Any of those are good. Yeah, I don't really know what the requirements are for the Android SDK plugin, but if you use Eclipse one, you should be fine. And Eclipse makes it really easy to have different versions of Eclipse installed. So if you have one that you're already using for some projects, say for work or something, it's easy to install and run in parallel another version of Eclipse. Just if you're on Windows, make another shortcut to it, or if you're on Mac, then just name it correctly wherever you install it so that you know which one you're opening, and you should be fine to run those in parallel. Okay, now that we've filled out this form here, we can click the Finish button and have the Android SDK build us a little application. So now let's take a tour around what was created by Android. Inside this package explorer, inside of our simple flashlight project, we have a couple different directories that were created. Eclipse users will recognize that there's some source directories here, and then there's some other types of directories that are a little bit different. So the source directories are where your Java files are stored inside of this sort of collapsed package structure here, which is nice. So you can see that it created this activity for us already. Then there's also another source folder called Gen, which is a little different. It's another source folder, but it's got this little Android annotation here. So that tells you that these are generated files that you're not going to be opening often, but they're also Java files. So Android keeps those a little bit separate from your code. We're going to be opening that in a little bit. Now, there's also some Google APIs here. You can tell which version you're built against. So these are the Android framework classes inside the Android jar, and then there's the Google-specific classes, which happen to just be maps at this point, which are going to be linked in your project here too. Now there's this other directory called res, which stands for resources, and that is generated automatically here for you, and that's where all those things that I remember I mentioned in the vocabulary section are going to be stored. There's the drawable and the layout and values folders inside of res that are also automatically generated. Drawables are things like your icon that you'll use to show your application if they drag it out onto the desktop of their device. And then there's any sorts of icon or bitmap images, and even some XML that describes how to draw things to Android, which we'll probably be covering in more advanced online workshops about Android. Those all go into the drawable directory. The directory is not really a magic name. It's just a nice way for you to keep things organized. Android's going to search deeply into this file structure here and grab out the things that are important and take care of those for you. Another category of resources is the layout directory, which I have selected here. You can see that there's one layout already created called main XML. So all of the Android layouts are built in an XML tag-based language that's sort of similar to something like HTML, or if you've ever used Adobe Flex, it's really similar to that as well, and I really like that. We're going to see that code in a little bit. And then finally, there's one more category of resources that are already generated for us, and those are values, and you can see that strings that XML has already created, and we're going to look at that really quickly. So before we step any more further into the code, I'm actually going to run in the emulator this complete version of the flashlight demo. So I right-click on this complete version, which I already have built, and say Run as Android application, and we're going to see the emulator start up. So back here in the IDE, you can see that there's some console messages coming out. And that tells us a little bit about the emulator opening up. So we should see the emulator here on screen. And as that boots up, let me talk a little bit about the emulator. So the emulator ships with the Android SDK, and it pretty much acts just like your device will. There's not really too much different, except you can't make free calls out of it, so that's one limitation. But when you're deploying your application to the emulator, things should be pretty similar to deploying your application to a device. But it's no substitute. I would say that if you're going to put something into the marketplace, at some point you need to get a hold of an Android device and deploy your application onto it, because the emulator has some slight differences and things that you don't want to be surprised by when your application is running just slightly differently on a actual Android device. Again, there's not going to be much of those things, but you don't want to be surprised. So the emulator is no substitute for testing on a device. So hopefully everybody can see that all right. I'm going to open up this demo application here. You can see that we've got a big red screen, and we've got a button labeled green on it. And when we press that green button, it switches over to the green screen. And then when we press the red button, it switches back to the red screen. So that's about the simplest application you can think of that actually shows some things like activities and intents, and we're going to be building those today. And then you'll have access to this code afterwards.
Tony, we have a couple of questions from people who are following along. One is that we have somebody who's missing the gen directory. Does that mean that Android didn't install correctly, or is there a way for them to try to generate the gen directory separately?
That's a good question. It sounds like something didn't go right. Yeah, I don't know if it's an installation problem. One thing that you may try, if you can see my screen, I'm switching back to the Eclipse, and I'm going to right-click the project, and if I go down to Android Tools, which should be an option in there, you can say Fix Project Properties. That may do what you want. If it doesn't, my only advice is to just follow along with the screencast and then come back later and follow any instructions online on the Android SDK website to try to set that up more correctly, because the code will run once you do that. So I'm sorry that that's a problem, but hopefully we can you can still get something out of the screencast right now.
Great.
Okay, looks like it didn't
one other
fix it.
quick question. Somebody who tried to compile, I think the example code got a failed to find an AVD compatible with target Google APIs. Do you know what an AVD compatible is?
That sounds like they need to create a, trying to remember where to do this. If you come here to Run Configurations, I'm going to just go through this quickly. Again, this is something that you can come back to later and just sort of absorb what's going on in the screencast without following along. But if you click Run Configurations here under the Play button, you can go to Android Application, press New up here in the top left, and create a configuration which over here in the Target tab you can click AVD Manager and then pick one or create one. I'm not really I can't think of what the flow may be like, since I already have one created. I don't know what it's like to create one just offhand here, but try to create one that uses the Google APIs here, and then once that's available, come back to your Run Configuration and pick that as the target AVD, which is I think Android Virtual Device. Yeah, Android Virtual Device. So try to do that if you'd like to catch up. But I'm going to make sure that I stay on track here.
Yep.
And you can always come back. Luckily, we're doing this. We're going to make this available to you afterwards. Sorry, Kevin. It sounds like you're running into a lot of problems there. Just try to stay up with the screencast, and hopefully we can. If you have any, like, these are great questions to try to answer on the forums afterwards. Okay, so let's. So what have we done here? We've gone through what the application is going to look like when we have it running on the device. And if I go out to the home, click the home button here. Let me point out one other thing. I've already dragged this application out to the desktop here. You can see that there's an icon under it, and it says Simple Flashlight. Those are all built off of the resources that were generated through the SDK. This icon here is the icon. If I go back to the Package Explorer, inside Res Drawable Icon, open that up, you can see that that's the icon that was generated for us. So you can replace that with the icon that makes sense for your application, and that's a good example of what the resources are all about. Okay, now let's start looking at some code. The first thing we want to look at is main XML and res layouts main XML. So when I open that up right away, the first thing I get is a screen that has Hello World red flashlight activity on it, and it's black. And it sort of has this visual editor here. I don't always find this to be useful for anything but sort of previewing what's going to be on the phone. So I don't actually use this that much. We're not going to cover it too much, but you can do things like dragging other, say I want an analog clock out here, I can drag an analog clock in there. Sweet, I've got an analog clock component in my application. You could do sort of some positioning and things like that. But if you get into any custom components, I find that it's not quite working as well as it could. How do I get rid of this thing? I don't even know how I can delete this component. Anyhow, so there's a few limitations that you may run into. What I like to see, since I'm a code kind of guy, is the actual code. So down here, let me point you in the right direction. Down here in the bottom left, you can switch between layout and main XML. and that between sort of this visual editor and the actual code, which is what I like to see. And here's the actual code. This XML is, again, like something like HTML or Adobe Flex. Each one of these tags corresponds with an Android class or an Android component, and I can easily either build those in Java or use them in XML afterwards. So that's a really nice way of looking at our application in something, in sort of a metaphor that we're all kind of used to. So you can see there's two tags already in main XML. There's linear layout and there's text view. And when we switch back to layout mode, you can see automatically what the text view is doing. It's just displaying some text on the screen. So the wrapper tag or the parent tag here is linear layout. What's that all about? There are a set of layouts that we'll probably be going into more in depth in later courses. But linear layout is probably the one that you'll use for your bread and butter layouts. That just lays out all the child components in a linear fashion, and you can see that the attribute orientation is set to vertical, and that means that all of the children are going to be set out on the screen in vertical, like one after another from top to bottom. I could also change that to horizontal, and things would be left to right. And that's what a linear layout is all about. It makes it really simple to put things out on the screen and just sort of lay them out in a linear fashion. Another thing is the layout width and height. These are two required properties that you have to have on pretty much every tag. There are some exceptions, but not many. And if you don't have these, you'll get an error. What this means is you can see two examples of what the properties layout width and height may be. There's fill parent, and down here in the text view there's wrap content, and that kind of does what it says. So on the width axis, if I say layout with fill parent, this layout is going to fill up on the width axis the parent, whatever parent it's included into. And wrap content, on the other hand, means that it's going to take into account whatever sort of content is in its tag. So that may take more account of its children than the parent. So this text view, I hope you understand what I mean by that. This text view is inside of the linear layout tag, so it is a child. We refer to it as a child of the text of the linear layout. So if I were to say for the layout height of this, instead of fill parent wrap content, then it would take into account how big the children of this tag want it to be. So pretty much you'll usually be switching between fill parent and wrap content, and that's the best way to go. You can also make those absolute values, like say 100 pixels, but you should probably know that that's exactly what you want to do, because remember that your screen, your user's screen can be changing orientation and size and things like that. So it's best to just let Android handle that layout until you get in some more custom applications. So the first thing we want to do to make this look a little bit more like the application that we already saw is this hello world type string, which was already created for us. We want to change that to say red instead, so it labels the screen that we're on. It's the title for the screen that we're on. So this attribute here, when you read this, I usually read this as attribute because I'm used to this from the Ruby world. But this is sort of a text, something that goes into the attribute, and it's pulled out of this resource of type string. So what this is saying is, give me a resource of type string named hello and put the value in here. So if you've ever done any localization or internationalization for your applications, you'll notice you'll understand what's going on here right away. We're referring to these string resources by a key that is unique, but can have multiple different values depending on what the user's localization or locale settings are. And the way that happens is, when I go back to the Package Explorer, inside res values, I have a strings directory, or I'm sorry, a strings file in the values directory, and that could be pre or postfixed with, like for instance, NUS, EN_US, and that would be string values localized for the English US locale. And I could have also strings_ES, which would be Spanish, or FR, I believe, is French. And that is the way that Android makes it really easy for you to start off your application by localization, localizing all of your resources. So let's open up the strings and see what's inside of there. You can already expect that there's going to be a hello string, and that's right here in this visual editor, and it has a value of hello world red flashlight activity. So if we switch back to main XML and look at the layout, you can see that that's exactly what's put out on the screen right here. But if I go back to strings, that's not what I want it to say. I want it to be a little bit more meaningful. And again, I'm going to switch from this visual editor to the actual code, strings XML. You can see that it's inside this resources root tag is where all of these resources are stored. And there's a tag for string, which marks this as a string type resource. And that is what actually tells Android to organize these things inside its conception of all your resources. It's not the directory structure. So you can have that directory structure however you want. The file names can be whatever you want, but the tags are what control all that. So what I'm going to do here is change hello to something more useful like red title, and then change this red title to be the word red. And if I save this, notice up here in the top right, one more thing that you're going to be noticing as we go forward is I have this little helpful program here which shows which key combinations I'm using. So this one is what I just did to save. I'm sure everybody knows the save key combination for your platform. I happen to be on a Mac, so there's this weird flower type guy to the left of S. That's called command. So if you're on Mac, you know that that's the command key. And if you're on Windows, just translate that in your mind to the control key. And so that tells you that I just pressed Command S, and on Windows you press Control S to save. There's also another one, so if I press Control S on the Mac, you can see that shows up as a little caret pointing upwards with the S key after it. And both of those, Control on the Mac and Command on the Mac translate into Control on Windows. So let's see, one other key type would be like Option on the Mac. That sort of weird key combination translates into an Alt on the Windows platform and Control on Linux too. Kevin, thanks for keeping me honest there. We have Linux developers out there. Good to hear. And then there's one more to know, and that is Shift. So if I press, for instance, Control Shift S here. I think key capture. I think I just turned it off. So if I press Command Alt S, that key combination is going to show up together. And if I press like Command Shift D, you can see that up arrow corresponds to the Shift key. So as we go along, you should notice that those things show up over to the right top side of your screen, and so you can tell what key combinations I'm pressing. Let me get rid of some weird things that showed up in here. And now, when oh look, it sounds like Brian's a BI user. Okay, all right, back to the code. So what I did was change that string hello to string red title, and now when I switch back to main XML, you can see over here, let me get back to my WebEx here and draw you a little circle. Over here on the left, we ended up with this red X, which shows us that we have an error. So that's good. The IDE is kind of helping us along and telling us when we change things that it's not expecting us to do, that something's wrong. Because what we changed is there's no longer a string resource called hello, there's now a red title. So when I change this to red title, save it, and hop over your layout, you can see that it says red here, which is what we want it to do. Now let's sort of put things a little more like we want. Actually, in the example that I showed, we had things laid out in the center. I'd like to have them laid out at the bottom. So what I'm going to use for that is I'm going to type in a attribute to the linear layout and change the gravity to bottom. You can see I get a little bit of command completion there, which is nice. Android gravity bottom. What that's going to do, if I switch over here to layout, is put red down here on the bottom of the screen. instead of at the top. So you can see all these attributes.
Hey, Tony.
Yes.
Tony, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we're having a problem with the screen sharing again. So you might try to stop sharing and restart it again. And it seemed to happen when you brought up the method you used to choose an application and switch between applications. So maybe avoid that. I don't know if that was the cause, but that's when it seemed to happen.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. Stop desktop sharing. Now I'm going to switch back to desktop sharing. And hopefully everybody can see everything okay now.
Yes, we're back in the linear layout.
Okay. If this keeps happening, I don't know, we're going to have to try something more drastic. But in any case, I'll try to go slower too so that the refreshes are fast enough for people to see. Okay, now that we've got a red title, we've laid things out on the bottom using the gravity bottom. We also want them to be centered in the middle of the screen horizontally, so I can use the type character and center horizontal. What I can do here also is let the ID do a little bit of work for me. I'm going to press Control Space, which would be Control Space on both Mac, Windows, and Linux, and I'm going to say center horizontal. And you can see that it gives me a little option there. So now my gravity is bottom and center horizontal. When I change back to layout, you can see that it didn't quite update. Oh, I know why. Because the layout width is still parent. I want that on the text. I want that instead to be wrap content. So it's only as big as it. Yeah?
Looks like we're having exactly the same problem as we did at the last session. It's not keeping up. So we need to switch between.
Well, you know, what I might do is get out of WebEx and come back in. Looks like I'm back, everybody?
Yep, you're back.
Okay. I'm going to be real superstitious too and not pop back up the WebEx window. I'm not sure if that was messing with it at all, but so that means I won't be able to see any questions.
Okay.
And I'll just stay in Eclipse and see if that helps. Okay. All right. Sorry, guys. Now we're back to the code. So what I did was change the text view layout width and height to be wrap content for both of those, so it's only as big as the content inside of it, and that will allow the Android Gravity to stick the text in the bottom in the center along the horizontal axis. Now, before we go too much further, I'm also going to add a button tag because I want there to be a button underneath there. So you can see as I'm typing here, it suggests that I probably want to type button. So if I hit enter there, it'll complete that with a button tag. I'm going to go up and copy and paste layout width and layout height here too, because that's required on all tags. And then that's not going to have any content, so that could be a single tag there. Now, what I'm also going to do, well, here, first of all, let me label this button. So I'm going to label the button using the same sort of attribute that the text one uses. I'm going to use Android text here, but I want this to be labeled, instead of red, I want this to be labeled green, because that's going to take us to the green screen. And you can see that right away an error came up because there is no string called green title. So if we hop back to the strings file, and I use another really useful Eclipse key combination, which is Command-Shift on Mac and Control-Shift on Windows down arrow. That's not it. Sorry, it's Alt-Command or Alt-Control on Windows or Linux down arrow, and that will duplicate the line. That one's pretty useful. I like that one a lot because it makes my coding a lot easier. I don't like to type. Nobody does. And I'm going to change this red title to green title, and then the contents to green. And now I have a string called green title with a value of green for at least the default localization. And so now that error went away. And now there's one more thing. We're going to start looking at this this application from the Java perspective in a little bit. And when I have this this layout displayed on the screen, sometimes I need to manipulate it using Java, the Java code. And to get access to these components inside the Java code, I need to refer to them by a unique identifier. And so there's another attribute here called Android ID, which we use to do that. This is going to label this button with a unique identifier. And I'm going to use a strange syntax that you haven't seen yet. Let me talk through it in a second. So I say plus ID slash, and I'll call this green button. Now let's talk through what just happened. So this is just like what you see inside the text attributes of these tags is an @ symbol and the name of the type of resource, and that's referring to a resource. But with this syntax here, which is sort of unique to IDs, is that we're actually creating a new resource of type ID here with this plus symbol. So this is saying, if you're familiar with working with databases, this is actually like kind of creating an auto number field in a database. We're saying create me an ID that auto increments, and so it's unique. It's unique to my to this application or to this particular button, and we're going to label it with green button. And so that is going to create a unique identifier called green button that we can use to get a reference to this component in our code. So now that we've seen that we can do that, we're going to hop over to Java land and look at this screen that we see out on our emulator from the Java perspective. So I'm going to change to the Package Explorer tab here, and then open up the red flashlight activity inside the source folder. And this was generated for us by the Android SDK plugin. And this is what puts out the screen that we see onto the device's screen, or the emulator screen. So you can see that red flashlight is a class that extends activity. That's an Android class. You can see it in the imports up here, Android.app.activity. And there's one method implemented called onCreate, which you can see is overridden from the activity class, and that's sort of part of the activity lifecycle. What happens is when an activity starts, the onCreate method is called. You can override that to do a little bit of work of your own here in your activity, and the rest is sort of working the way that Android activity works anyway. So that's a paradigm that you'll see happen in a lot of these Android system classes. You'll see that you can hook in at certain points and do some work at points in the life cycle. And at the onCreate point, that's the beginning of the life cycle of this activity. And all it's done here is, first, it's really important to call super.onCreate and pass in this bundle, which is passed along to us. And that may hold some saved state that the activity needs to know about, because it may be opening up from a state that had some information associated with it. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but you just need to know that you need to pass that up to super. And then set content view is called. And set content view pulls up this layout main, which you can see follows the same sort of directory structure that we see inside of resources. So resources layout main is referred to as r.layout.main here. Now it's time, I think, to look at the R class so we can kind of see how that's referred to, or what goes on that we're referring to inside this generated class. So if I open up r.java, I can see that it's a final class that I can't override, and it has all sorts of messages in here that say don't mess with this, it's automatically generated. And then on top of that class are some inner classes that are static and final, and they correspond to those directories inside, or the different types of resources inside of the resources directory. So you can see drawable here, and there's an icon that has a unique identifier. And then there's an ID, green button, which we just created. So all these things are referred to on R, and they allow us to, without having to get down into the file system and open resources off the file system, we can refer to these things with this nice, easy, sort of a nice little hack that the Android platform does to make it easy to refer to the resources. And you shouldn't have to really look at what goes on in R, you just have to make use of it. So that's another little bit of Android development there. So what this is saying is open up the main layout resource and make that my view here. So now that we've got this far in the application, let's run this in our emulator. So I'm going to go to this play button and run simple flashlight, and that's because I already have done that. But if you haven't, one thing you can do, or what you would do to sort of kick that off, is come to your Package Explorer, right-click the project, and say Run as Android Application. So I'm going to run this and see what we've got so far. Unfortunately, we have to actually switch to the emulator ourselves. It won't just come to the front when we want it to show up. So you can see that we've got a green button and a little red label here. And when we press the green button, it acts like it's being pressed, but it doesn't actually do anything. So there's a few more things that we need to do to get this screen in shape. One thing is to make the green button expand from side to side so that it's easier to hit. It's an easier hit target for the user. And we also need to make the background red. So let's go do that really quickly. Inside main XML, the button width needs to fill parent. So that's going to make that happen. And I also want the background to be red. So I'm going to type what I want first, and then it's going to error, and we're going to make it do what we want by sort of a code first type of a thing here. So what I want is the background, Android background, to be a type of a color resource, and I want that to be red background. So if I save that, it says, hey, what's going on? There's no resource of type color with a key of red background, so we need to go make that. Inside Package Explorer, we go down to values. I'm going to make a file called colors. If I go right-click the values directory and say new, and then make a file, I'm going to call it colors.xml. Again, that's not a magic name. That doesn't mean anything to Android. What is important to do, though, is to make this a child of resources tag. So I type part of that and hit Control Space, and that will create a resources tag for me. And then I can complete that tag. So that tells Android that we've got a resource in here, and then we tell it that we want to have some color resources in here with a color tag. I want the name to be red background, and I want the value to be just like if you were doing some HTML development, you use a hex setup here where the red component is here, blue component is here, and green component is here. So we want full value of red and no value of the other ones. So now if I come back to main XML, you can see that my error went away and I should have a red background. So if I deploy that again to the emulator, I should see things shaping up a little bit more like we want. And here it comes, and now that's exactly what we want. We've got a red background, and the green button is nice and easy to hit for the user. Okay, next step is let's make that green button do something. Since we don't actually have the green screen set up yet, I'm just going to make a little message pop up so that we can go over what it's like to make that button respond to something. So back here in the Java code, what I need to do to get a reference to that button is first make a variable of type button. You can see that Eclipse doesn't know what that is yet, so if I hit Control Space, it will fix that problem by importing a button widget, which is what we want. You can see that also Android, if Eclipse has any trouble, it does a little sort of red squiggly line underneath it that tells us we've got a problem there. And we can fix that by doing Control Space in a lot of situations. So I'm going to create a button reference, and we'll call this red button. Actually, no, that's a green button because we want to go to the green screen. So green button is a type of button, and we're going to get a reference to it by calling find view by ID. You can see I typed find and hit Control Space there, and it auto-completed with the method that we need to call to get a reference to that button, which is find view by ID. Now the ID we want to pass in, we get off of the R class, our old friend R, in r.id.greenButton. So I found this view by ID, but it's just going to bring back a view. What I need instead is to cast that to a button, and now we've got a reference to that green button, and we can make it do what we want. So the next step is to actually create what's called a click listener on that green button that does run some code that we want it to run. So I'm going to type this out, and then we'll kind of go over what we're seeing because it's a little bit interesting. So green button dot set on click listener. I want that to be a anonymous view on click listener. I'm creating an anonymous class inside of this method here, and that view on click listener is actually an interface. We're making an anonymous version of this interface that the class that we're making needs to correspond to be a click listener and to be notified when the user clicks the button. So you can see I'm hovering over this problem area here because we haven't actually implemented the interface. We just say we want this type of an interface. But what Eclipse will do for us is add the unimplemented methods, the ones that are required by this interface. So I can click that, and those methods will show up. But I'm going to hit undo here, and the problem should come back because there's another way we can do this. If I type Control-1 or Command-1 inside this problem, it will give me this menu of things that I can do as well. So I add the unimplemented methods, clean up the code just a little bit, and you can see that the unimplemented method that we need to actually implement is called onClick, and it takes an argument of a view. So now we have some code that will correspond, or that will respond when the user clicks that button. So what we're going to do here quickly is just throw up a message. Sorry, I got used to typing my name. I'm going to throw up a message, and I'll kind of tell you what this code does once I type this out here. I'm going to use a class called Toast, and it needs a context, and it takes some text. We'll just say hello world, and then it also takes a duration, which is going to be toast dot length long, and then we have to call show on this. Okay, so what I've done here, that's a lot of code. We need to go over what we just did here. I've used this little class called Toast to make some text show up. Now, a Toast notification is, if you're a Mac user, it's kind of like a growl. If you're Windows or Linux, it's a sort of a little flash of text that comes up to tell the user some information, but it's not really something that they need to act on, so it will just sort of fade away over time. So let's deploy this to the emulator and look at what we've done. As this pops up on the screen, again, I can press the green button, and it should say Hello World here in the middle of the emulator. Hopefully that stays up long enough for you to see on the screen. So now we know that we can respond to this button click and at least do something, even though it's not what we ultimately want to do. All right, the next step we need to do is to actually build our green screen. So what I'm going to do is give myself a bit of a shortcut here and go down to Layout. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this simply green.xml. And you can see it comes up into the layout mode. So I could drag some stuff out onto here if I want, but I'm going to go right into the code and cheat. Don't tell anybody. But I'm going to copy the contents of the main layout into the green layout. And because they're so similar, I kind of want them to do the same thing. So now I've got the components that I want, but not necessarily the values that I want inside of this green layout. So what I actually want, first of all, is for the background on this layout to be green. So I'm going to change this to green background for the color. And I'm going to change this title to green title. And I'm going to change the button title to red title. And that's actually going to work because we already have one, but some of these other ones are going to error out. See, if I go to strings, it looks like I already created green title. Nope. There it is. Okay, good. So that's already going to work. But if I see where my actual errors are, it looks like I need to create a green background. So if I go to colors, use my little duplicate line trick, Command Option or Control Alt, down arrow, duplicate that line, create a green background which is just the FFs in a different place here. I think in the middle, red, green, blue. Okay, now I should have a green background. So what is it complaining about? I need to call this green background, save that, and in my green layout, I should have no more problems. Okay, good. Now we've got a view that should work correctly, but we need an activity to actually make that show up on the screen. So the next step is to create an activity that will hold that green view. So if I come to the source directory inside my package structure, I right-click it and I say New, I create a class. I get a little dialog here to create a class. I want this to be called Green Flashlight Activity.
Hey, Tony, while you're creating a new activity, I had a quick question related to that. Somebody asked if there was any convention for activity names.
I like to postfix them with activity. I like to postfix them with what they are. I don't really go into too much more depth than that. You know, I can't think of off the top of my head if I've noticed any pattern in how the Google guys create the code that ships along with Android. I think they may do the same thing. They may postfix it with the activity or postfix it with what type it is. So I mean that also goes further into I also postfix it with like intent, and you'll see that in a little bit. Well, actually, no, we're not going to be creating a custom intent. So yeah, I just sort of postfix it with the type of class it is. That makes it a little easier to understand right off the bat what it is. So one other thing is I like to store them in, say, I'll have a package structure of like com.O'Reilly.SimpleFlashlight activity and com.O'Reilly.SimpleFlashlight views if I have some custom views. So that's about all I go into. I don't go into anything more. I'm not one of those kind of guys that likes to like prefix interfaces with I or go, and I really don't like Polish notation or Hungarian notation. I mean, that kind of stuff bugs me. I like my code to be almost readable in my native English instead of crazy indicators sitting around to like what type of variable is and stuff. I think the IDE should do that kind of stuff for you. I like my code to be readable. Anyhow, that was a bit of a tangent, but I think postfixing your classes with the type that they are is a nice little convention to fall into. So speaking of that, we have to have this superclass be of type activity instead of object. So what I'm going to do is type AC here, maybe ACT, and you can see there's a little light bulb that shows up to the left of this text field. That means that I can hit Control Space in here and get some code completion, and then drop down and choose Android App Activity, and that's the superclass that we want here. So now when I click Finish, we'll have a class called Green Flashlight Activity that we can use to show the green screen on the device screen. Okay, so this class is a little bare though. You've already seen what it takes inside the red flashlight activity to make things show up on the screen. We need an onCreate method. But instead of typing that myself and making sure that I get the signature right, I'm going to have Eclipse do the work for me, and I'm going to hit on the Mac Command-Alt-F, and on Windows and Linux, I think it'll be Control-Alt-F, and that will bring up this source menu for me. And that will allow me to hit this override or implement methods, and that will look up on all the class hierarchy to the parents and ancestors, and let me choose methods that are available for me to override. And I'm going to scroll down in the list here to onCreate and choose this as a method that I want to override. I click OK, and the code gets generated for me, pulling all the imports that I need and everything, which is nice. Anytime I can save typing makes me happy. So you can see that it's already calling onCreate. That's exactly what we need. Well, the next step that we need is to call setContentView. So hit Control Space, and that's going to pull something up that's probably a good suggestion for me. And I'm going to put in as an argument r.layout.green. And that will actually show the green XML layout on the screen for us when this activity is run, which is what we want. I can't actually make that show up yet in the emulator because I can't refer to that just yet. We don't have the right code in place. But let me take the extra step of actually grabbing a hold of that green button here. You already saw me type this. So, it says a green button, we'll call this red button because that's going to go back to the red screen. So I'm going to use the find view by ID method, and the ID I want is r.id.red button. I don't think I actually did that yet, so that's good. You see that there's an error here. What I need to do is go back to the green XML and change this ID from green button to red button, and now we have a red button ID that we can refer to in the code, and everything looks green here, so to speak. Now that I have a reference to that button, I'll leave the on-click listener for a little bit later. Let's go through the steps of actually showing the green screen on the emulator screen when we click the green button. So what we want to do back here in the red flashlight activity is, instead of this little toast message, we want to create an intent, because that's how, again, we move between different views. So I'm going to create an intent, hit the command control space to import that, call it intent, make it a new intent, and then what I do to kick everything off is called start activity and pass in the intent. And that's what we need to do to kick off an intent, to tell Android that we want to run an intent. Okay, the intent here, though, is a little bit bare. We need to actually do some things, give some arguments to the intent to make it do what we want. The first thing is we need to pass in a context that we're coming from. And the context is, if I was up here inside the code, I would say this, because this activity, this current instance of this activity, is the context that we need. Tell Android this is where we're coming from. But since I'm in this anonymous class, this is sort of a bit of Java red tape we have to jump through. I need to say red flashlight activity dot this to tell Java that we want to refer to the outside the scope of this anonymous class. Also here, the next thing that I need to do is to tell Java that the next class I want to go to is green flashlight activity dot class. So this intent takes two arguments: the context that we're coming from and the destination class that we're going to. This is one type of intent, probably the most common type of intent that you'll create. I want to go from this activity to this activity. So that's fairly clear, sidestepping any issues of Java red tape that we had to jump through, that we're going from red flashlight activity to green flashlight activity. So now, if I run this in the application, in the emulator, I should go from the red flashlight activity to the green flashlight activity, right, when I press the green button. Except when I press the button, I'm going to get an error, and it gives me a really uninformative error message. And I run into this error all the time because I always forget this other step. So try to cement this in your mind. Whenever you create a new activity, you need to tell Android that that activity exists. So switching back to Eclipse, what I'm going to do is open up the last class, or the last piece of the Android project that we haven't seen yet, the Android manifest. That's right here. And that is an XML file that will again open up in sort of this visual layout editor that I don't really like. If I switch over to the actual XML code, you can see that this manifest describes to Android our application. Everything in our application is sort of described by this manifest, anything that's important for Android to deal with. Inside the manifest, which has our package name in it, there is an application tag which describes our application. You can see that it says this is the icon we want to use, and this is the label we want to use for the shortcut that goes out on the desktop, for instance. But it also lists all the activities inside of the application. And you can see that this activity tag corresponds to the red flashlight activity, and it has a dot in front of it. And what that means is that goes on to the end of this package. So com.O'Reilly.SimpleFlashlight.red flashlight activity is the class that corresponds to this activity. So you need to use that little dot inside of there. And you also notice that this activity has an intent filter on it, which basically means, in this case, that it's the main intent, and it should be fired when you run the launcher. So that means that this activity is going to be started when you actually open up the activity. I'm sorry, when you open the application. Luckily, what we need to do now is to describe the activity, the green flashlight activity, but that's all we need to do there is give it a name. And the name here is, again, dot green flashlight activity. And that's all we need to do there. We don't need to go through these other steps of the intent filters for our cases here. So now when I run this code in the emulator, and I press the green button, I should go to the green screen, and there we go. Except when I press red, it doesn't do anything. So now we've used an intent to navigate between two activities. We've gone from the activity with the red background to the activity with the green background. To get back, all we need to do is put an on-click list around this red button on the green screen, and that's what we'll do now. Except there's a slight difference in what we're going to do. Instead of starting a new red activity, we're going to go back to the existing red activity. So the difference there is what you have to think of is just like in your browser, your web browser history, you've got a history of different websites that you've visited, and you can go back with the back button. Activities are are set up kind of in the same way. So when I go from the red activity to the green activity, and I go back from the green activity to the red activity using the back button on my Android device, I'm sort of like going back in history. And it's like there's this deck of cards, and I put the green card on top, and then I take the green card away, and underneath it is the red card. What I need to do, if I was to use an intent to open up the red activity, I would be putting a new instance of that red card on top of the green activity. I wouldn't be going back to the red activity that was already existing. There are ways around that are more sort of outside of the scope of this workshop, but generally that's what your activities are doing when you're opening up a new intent, is you're putting new instances onto the stack. So what we want to do from the green activity is, instead of opening a new red flashlight activity, I'm going to finish this activity. So that's in essence taking the green activity off the stack and going back to whatever was underneath it, which should be the red activity. I'm going to set an on-click listener here. And inside of it, instead of starting a new intent, what I'm going to do is instead just call this simple method finish, which finishes this current activity. And again, that will pop off the green activity off of that stack of cards, and we'll go back to the red activity, which is underneath. And when I run the code, it should be exactly what happened. I hope everybody gets that card metaphor. That's kind of what you have to think of as you're building up your application's worth of activities. So now when I click the green button, I go to the green screen, and when I click the red button, I finish the green activity, which takes me back to the red screen. And that is our application. So, again, this code is available to you if you want to look at it afterwards to make things more clear to you, or to visit some of the concepts that we covered. But what we covered today, once I switch back to, hopefully everybody can see the, does anybody not see the presentation here? Okay, that's good. What we covered, and you can go back and visit inside the code, is our way around Eclipse a little bit. We saw some of like the project layout drawer, and we learned how Android sort of works in with the Eclipse IDE. We built two simple views, the red view and the green view, and we built activities to control those views using some help from Eclipse. And then we had an intent go from the red view to the green view, and then we finished that activity to go back to the red view. And hopefully along the way you ran into a few useful key combinations. So that is a really simple Android application that you can sort of play around with yourself. But if you want to take it a step further, you can also use that code and sort of use it as a starting point to build an application yourself. And as a suggestion, what you could do is open up the dialer activity instead of some custom activities. And the way you would do that is make an intent, which instead of those class names uses this intent.action dial, as you can see down here in the code hint, and you can use that to, when the user presses a button, open up the dialer activity. So that's kind of some homework that you can use to cement some of this stuff in your mind. And I encourage you to play with that afterwards. And if you have any problems, again, you can post to the forums, and I can help you out there. But that is the extent of this online workshop. And again, I thank O'Reilly for putting this together, and I thank you guys for all attending. And hopefully you've learned a little bit about Android development. And now I think we have a little bit of time to take some questions. So, Elizabeth, did I miss any questions so far, or are there any questions that anybody has?
We do. We have a couple more. Before we get to the questions, since we're getting close to the finish time, in case anybody has to leave, I want to make sure that you take the survey because your input is incredibly valuable. So I'm going to go ahead and post that survey link in there in case anybody has to leave. And then, yes, we do have a couple more questions. One person asked, how do we add buttons to a specific layout at runtime dynamically?
So what you could do there is construct the button using a constructor that passes in some of those required attributes like the layouts. I don't have code to show you right now, but we're to echo what Elizabeth said, if this was a good learning experience for you, we want to do more of these. So that could be a topic of an online workshop that we can do in the future. But let us know, and we can go on to those topics later. But basically, what you would do is to create a button using the Java class constructor and kind of tell it how to lay itself out, and you would add it to a layout that's already there. And you can even add layouts dynamically at runtime. That's all possible.
That does sound like a good topic for another session. Another question was, is there any place to find best practices for developing Android?
The best place you can go, I can't stress strongly enough, is since it's an open source framework, go look at the Google code. Go look at how they built the applications. I'm not going to say that they are exactly how you should build your applications, but you can see exactly what they did to build the applications that ship with your phone. So go check those out and figure out what they're doing, and that's a great resource for you.
Great. And then one last question. Is Android going to start allowing other languages like PHP, Python, C, etc.?
I doubt there'll ever be, well, I guess never say never, but the first, there were rumors, and finally it's come true, you can now develop in C++ using the native development kit, which sort of ties you down a little bit more, doesn't leave your code as independent of device as using the C++ code or the native development kit, but that's another language that's open to you. What I'm interested in as Java starts to become more of a container for dynamic languages like Python or Ruby, you can use those as sort of a scripting framework inside of Android or something like that. That'll be interesting to try out. There's also something called the Android scripting framework, and I'm not really sure about a lot of that because that's kind of new. I haven't really dug into it. You can do sort of the scripting language approach to doing some simple things with Android. And also, since, again, this is built using Java on the JVM, you have available all those fancy JVM languages. One I'm really interested in is Scala, which compiles down to Java bytecode, and there are ways of writing Scala code and developing Android applications with it. So that's a good way of doing it. A different language. There's also languages like Clojure, and you could probably do some Groovy stuff inside there too, but I'm not sure. But those are all some possibilities.
Great. Well, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to end this up. But remember that we do have a private forum associated with the course, so you can ask additional questions, and Tony will be monitoring that forum and hopefully answer any additional questions that you might have. And remember, you can sign up with the members.o'reilly.com URL for a free account and get access to that forum. So please be sure to take the survey, which will appear automatically when the workshop ends. And thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Tony.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody for showing up.